About 4 or 5 years ago, I was riding through eastern Oregon. I was coming back from a week-long stay at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. I was on Route 140, which goes through some pretty desolate, isolated country. And as I'm in eastern Oregon, not too far from the Nevada border, I came on this herd of cattle that was being driven somewhere. There was a rough estimate, about 1,000 head, being herded by cowboys, a couple in the rear, a couple up front, and they're pushing them down the highway. Now, I don't know if you've ever been behind a cattle drive or not, but cattle don't move very fast. They amble along at a pace about 1, maybe 2 miles per hour at the quickest. I'm anxious to get home. I don't want to go 1 or 2 miles per hour. So I began bumping my way through. Now, bumping my way, if you've never come up behind a herd of cattle on the highway, and if you've driven on freeways most of your life, you probably never have. They don't seem to care that you're behind them. So you have to get their attention, and the way you do that is very, very slowly. You come up behind them, and as they're walking along, you bump them. And they kind of hunch their back and they trot forward a little ways. And you may have to do it 2 or 3 times before they finally get irritated and get out of your way. So that's what I was starting to do, bump my way through this cattle herd. I end up with my truck right beside this cowboy who's herding the cattle. And I looked over at him. He's wearing boots, spurs, chaps, big cowboy hat. And I felt this sense of awe wash over me. And I slid back nearly, well, at least 60 years in time, when I too was on a cattle drive in Colorado. Something we used to do every year. We'd drive the cows about 20 miles up to what was called the head of the Florida Mesa. Now, Florida, by the way, is spelled like Florida, but pronounced Florida. The Florida Mesa, from Bayfield to the Florida Mesa, was on a highway that took you up to Viceta Dam. Well, we always turned off before we got to the dam. The dam was a popular tourist location. And it's in the spring, late spring. We're heading the cows up there. The snow has melted off the high mountains. And suddenly there's this black Cadillac right beside me. And I looked over at the Cadillac. It had New York license plates. I noticed that later. And he's beginning to bump his way through cows. That was a little more common back then than it is now. And he began to slowly bump his way through the cows. And I looked at the back window. There was this young man, maybe 5, 6 years old. And his nose is plastered against the rear window, and his hands are up here like this, and he's looking at me, and there's this look of wonder in his face. New York, it was probably the first time he'd ever seen a cowboy, and I fit the part. I wore big Stetsons, 4-inch brim, high heel cowboy boots, 2-inch heel, custom made from Blucher Boot Company, spurs, handmade chaps. I was into it big time. I loved the life. And he's looking at me like this. And I decided, well, I'll give him something to look at. And I cut a calf out of the herd, and I started chasing it with my rope being twirled over my head. That didn't last very long, but it was a show just for him. I never forgot that look of awe on that boy's face. And there it was, maybe 60 years later, maybe even more. And I'm the young kid in the car. I wanted to roll my window down and tell him that story, but I didn't. Those years were a life that I just loved. working with cattle, working on the farms, plowing, haying, doing everything that's required on a ranch. I loved it. I'd love to go back to those days, but I'll tell you something. I went in the Navy, and I went in the Navy because cowboying didn't pay too well. I stayed in the Navy for 13 and a half years. Never went back to cowboying, though. Never owned a horse since then either. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tale from the past. See you all later. Bye-bye.